Hello there my Gummies and welcome back to the Echo Chamber. Now getting back into what if Krillin trained with King Kai after being killed by Tambourine.
So last time on What If Krillin Trained with King Kai after being killed by Tambourine, Gohan managed to pull out a victory against Cell, completely eradicating him from the face of the earth. Unfortunately, this came at the cost of Goku's life. Things from there essentially went the same way as they did in canon, thus allowing the earth to return to peace once again, and officially leading us into the Buu Saga.
Last night took a L, but tonight I bounce back. Wake up every morning, by the night I count stacks. Knew that ass was real when I hit it, bounce back.
7 years have now passed and the Earth has remained in relative peace. Once again thanks to Gohan and the rest of the Z fighters. And for the most part I would say that things happen the same way that they did in canon, with a few minor changes here and there. For instance, Gohan, unlike his canon counterpart, essentially never stopped training. Although yes, he was commissioned by Chi-Chi and to end up going to high school, which he does do, it didn't actually alter his personality in any way, meaning that he still has a personality he did as a kid, although it was more developed and matured, and he ended up taking Goku's words to heart, and therefore kept up his training, developing new skills and abilities, and actually even be able to harness certain techniques. We'll get more into that later in the story. Of course, Goten is stillborn, but just like with Gohan, he ends up developing more of a sense towards fighting. However, I don't think this really changes anything too much from canon in regards to Goten's character to begin with, as he was always more enthusiastic about training rather than studying. It was always Gohan originally who had more of the peaceful heart and the peaceful nature about him, but Goten was more or less like his father. So that wouldn't really change here. And with a much stronger Gohan and a Gohan who's more enthusiastic about training, Goten actually is able to maintain a high level of strength, and he's essentially a prodigy, already developing Super Saiyan at a very young age. Now I know some people may question, what about his relationship in regards to Trunks? Will they still be able to have their rivalry? Yes, and this is only because of Gohan being able to train Goten and essentially push him to essentially close the gap that would be due to the fact that Trunks would be 2 years older in this timeline. Although Trunks still has somewhat of a downward look towards Goten, it's not necessarily evil, it's more or less just I'm the bigger brother, because again he is 2 years older than him. However, they still develop quite the friendship and brotherly bond. And in fact, that brings us to our final major change in regards to Vegeta's personality. Now I already stated in previous parts that he basically had the personality and attitude that he did in the Buu Saga by the time we actually got to the Cell arc, or even the Android Saga if you want to count that. Meaning that he's far less antagonistic toward the rest of the members of the group, and in fact they've even developed quite the bond and trust with him. This is especially true for Gohan, who essentially had been developing that bond and trust with Vegeta ever since he was still a little kid, and it has only continued to persist here, which actually does go forward in helping Vegeta quell some of the anger he had towards Goku, who essentially died before they ever got a proper rematch. Now I'm not saying the entirety of that anger has gone away, but I am saying that for the most part it's quelled because he actually has an opponent that is actually worth fighting, and worth getting stronger for, that being Gohan. The two of them actually meeting up periodically from time to time not only to spar, but help each other develop along the way, which not only helps both parties develop in terms of their fighting prowess, but also enhances the maturity and intrigue within both of their characters. Which brings us into our last change, that being Gohan's approach to the Great Saiyan Man. Now in my humble opinion, I always felt like the Great Saiyan Man originally in canon was more or less a Superman archetype. Gohan was very jovialistic, he was always kind of like the more Boy Scout, he was there to lend a helping hand. But here, I think that in this timeline, given Gohan's experiences and given his maturity, I think that he would actually be more closer to a Batman archetype, just with godlike Saiyan power. Does that stop him from developing with Videl? No, in any way it actually kind of helps. In the way that Gohan approaches her, acts around her, and essentially convinces her that being a superhero isn't something just to laugh off. I mean, she thought she was being serious before, but when she got to see Gohan in action, she knew that she didn't even have a chance. And of course, I think that this would actually attract her more so to Gohan, especially given the fact that although Videl is smart, and I will never take away this from her intelligence, but given Gohan's new personality, I doubt he would let it slip up that he's a Great Saiyan Man in any conceivable way. Eventually he does open up to her and explain who he is, and she kind of gets the gist of that, but she does want him to train her. And I would actually say she not only develops much quicker given Gohan's knowledge of Ki is far more developed here than it was in canon, and the fact that he always kept up his training, so he has better methods of being able to teach her, and better techniques to be able to give to her, given all the teachers and masters he's had over the years. Thus, in my personal opinion, I actually think that Videl will be much stronger here than she was in canon. not only possessing the ability to fly, but she also has other unique key abilities as well, including physical enhancement as well as shooting ki blast. And honestly, due to Gohan's seriousness in regards to round training and the fact I don't think he would take it easy on her, especially because even in canon Videl didn't want that, I said that her power would get raised tremendously. In fact, if I had to make a guess as to where she would be by the time we get to the tournament, I would actually put her around Kid Goku's level. This would be around the 22nd Tenkaichi Budokai, which of course is indeed nothing compared to our Z fighters, but she does make a great addition to the team, and I'm not going to sit here and sleep on her ability. This does bring us to the martial arts tournament itself, where pretty much everything kind of goes the same way it did in canon. Videl ends up telling Gohan about it, Gohan ends up telling everyone else, and even Goku ends up chiming in saying that he's essentially going to end up being there, which does perk up everyone else within the group, composed of our Z fighters, given the fact that they all want to kind of test themselves against each other. But with Goku coming back, that's obviously got them even more excited. But like I said, pretty much things happen the same way that they did in the canon, up until the point where we get to meet Shin and Kibito. Whereas the particular meeting itself doesn't necessarily change, the events going forward do have some change to them. Such as when Kibito goes up against Gohan and acts that he showcases his full power. Essentially, Gohan does the same thing, except when he goes to Super Saiyan 2 this time and he goes to full power, it was far more than what Kibito was expecting, exceeding the parameters far more than what he thought possible. Of course, both Vegetamu took up at the chance to take Gohan's energy, and of course, Shin does come in with the assist by trying to restrain Gohan. However, the restraints ended up failing. Gohan is so much stronger than he was originally in canon that there's no way that Shin would be able to remotely even hold him. However, this ended up being trouble for Shin because he had a specific plan in mind, so telepathically he ends up talking to Gohan and letting him know roughly as to what was happening, and thus he asks Gohan to allow both Vegetamu to take his energy. Gohan reluctantly agrees, and the deed is done. However, Gohan was much more smarter about this, and given the fact that he had learned some semblance of a spirit control from Krillin, although I would say Krillin still had a far higher level of mastery when it comes to all of the techniques that are incorporated, Gohan was still able to use them. Case in point, the Force Spirit Fission, which was actually lucky that he ended up doing that, as the energy that both Vegetamu took from Gohan this time around, unlike in canon, was far too strong. It would have immediately released Majin Buu if they had ended up taking it to him. But again, Gohan, using Force Spirit Fission and thinking intelligently, was able to draw out a lot of the power, or at least a significant amount, to where Buu's resurrection will still be stalled, only leaving both Vegetamu with about half. Now, of course, this wasn't hindsight from Gohan, it was more so him trying to help himself, so that way he wouldn't be stuck on the ground waiting essentially for Kibito to heal him. He could essentially just heal himself by restoring his own energy. Krillin too had ended up thinking ahead and ended up getting some senzu beans from corn, and thus he had gave one to Gohan, allowing it to finish healing him. And with that, the group devises a plan as to who's going to be going with Kibito and Shin in order to be able to chase both Vegetamu, which ends up boiling down to the same people that went in canon, and so they ended up taking off in order to chase after the two. Along the way, Shin ends up explaining everything about Babidi and Majin Buu, and his relationship to them. Now, things do go as per normal, up until we get to the point where the boar tries to kill Kibito, because as soon as he gets into his face, ready to launch his attack, Krillin actually jumps in the way using instant transmission, kicking his arm back, thus preventing him from being able to do the blast, and in quick succession, prepares a Kienzan and throws it straight at him. However, although the boar was taken aback at first, he regains his bearing and ends up dodging, firing his petrification spit at Krillin, as well as several other members of the group. Krillin instinctually puts up a ki shield, which ends up blocking the spit from hitting him. However, some of the other members of the group were not so lucky, as for the most part, most of them pretty much ended up dodging it, save for Kibito and Piccolo, who ended up getting turned into stone. This ended up catching the group off guard, but none more so than Shin, who was almost hit by the spit that was launched at him. Lucky enough, Gohan ended up jumping in the way, and taking out the Krillin, he ended up putting up a ki shield, protecting them both. The boar ends up smirking and then laughing, basically beckoning them to come inside, essentially saying it was the only way that they would be able to save their friends. The group ends up following after him, going inside of Babidi's spaceship, where essentially Babidi has to prepare fighters in order to gain energy in order to free Buu. Of course, Shin was doing his normal freak out, but Krillin was there to reassure him and tell him essentially to calm down, and they could handle whatever Babidi can throw at them. Although Shin basically says not to underestimate. This brings over to the fight with Pui Pui, which actually doesn't end up going the same way that it did in canon. This is due to the fact that while everyone was kind of doing rock, scissors, paper to decide who would go and fight who, Krillin ended up vaulting forward and challenging Pui Pui on his own. Of course, Shin was still freaking out, basically saying that they should be working together in order to be able to fight him, but Krillin just basically waved him away and told him that this is going to be no challenge at all. And he was indeed correct, because just like with Vegeta, Krillin ends up picking Pui apart almost effortlessly. Although he's not as smooth with it like Vegeta, he essentially is able to beat Pui no problem. Babidi even does the whole transferring him over to Pui's planet, which has 10 times the gravity, but that doesn't really change anything. Even after Pui boasts about the gravity being 10 times that of Earth, Krillin just smirked and then retorted with,
"Maybe if it was 5,000 times, you might have had a chance. But 10? I don't even feel it."
And of course he then proceeds to just bully Pui before finishing him off with actually a new technique. That being that he was able to convert the cutting energy of the Kienzan into a different style of weapon. Changing it into a Keyblade, he ends up cutting Pui in half. And as far as the other matches are concerned, the only thing that really changed ended up being the order. That being that instead of Goku fighting Yakan, it ended up being Vegeta, who essentially discovers the same weakness as Goku and easily beats Yakan. There's like no contest there. In regards to Dabura, I would have had Goku fight him, but I'd rather keep it the same way as it was in canon, giving that fight to Gohan. Now this is specifically due to the reason that Goku gives, being the fact that he wanted to actually see how well Gohan has progressed over the last 7 years. After all, he did pass on the mantle of the family legacy to him. He wanted to see if he was still able to uphold it, kind of giving him this opportunity to prove himself. And Gohan was more than happy to oblige, getting a sinister grin as he flew up to Dabura. And the fight is practically a wash. I mean, if canon Gohan as just a Super Saiyan, or even if you want to say Master Super Saiyan, was somewhat even with Dabura, and the fight could have went either way, and this was after Dabura went to full power and charged himself up, then this Gohan basically just picks him apart. The dismantling being so thorough that Babidi has to end up coming to the rescue of Dabura and getting him out the way, as the amount of energy that he was collecting from that fight was basically nothing, because Gohan was just so easily able to overwhelm him, which does put a smile on both Goku and Vegeta's face. Anyway, Babidi begins to panic because he has no idea what to do, so he tries his last option and essentially goes to search for some evil, hopefully in one of their hearts. Considering that the way that they fight and how brutal it is, these guys must have some level of evil inside of them, something that he can use in order to bring to the surface, to essentially bring him another minion. That way, maybe, just maybe, he'd be able to get enough energy in order to be able to release Boo. But of course, this ends up proving rather difficult, as the only one who even remotely has such an anger or to any significant degree or some type of evil is still none other than Vegeta. However, the problem is, given Vegeta's personality and attitude and how he's been over the years, he doesn't really have that much of a motivation. Besides, he never even got to see what Goku was capable of or how much his power has grown over the years. He's still waiting for the tournament in order for that to happen. And although he saw Gohan's power, it only made him proud, if anything. Glad to see that he kept up with his training. Not to mention, with the two having sparred and trained with each other over the years, Vegeta has a pretty good understanding and grasp as to what Gohan is capable of, although he still recognizes the immense potential inside of him. Nevertheless, Babidi still tries to go for it. It's a desperate gamble. It forces Babidi to use an immense amount of magical power to dig really deep, bringing up all Vegeta's lingering hatred, feelings, and anger to the surface, and actually pushing it so far to where he actually does have a complete control over Vegeta's mind at this point. Because otherwise it wouldn't work, especially if Vegeta had an immense amount of control, the same way he did in canon. So of course, in this what if, Vegeta having his mind actually completely taken over would be the only course of action here. And thus Majin Vegeta is born. And although Babidi has a control over his mind, he does not have a control over his pride nor instincts, which still, like any typical Saiyan, would seek out the strongest opponent and go to challenge them. Which, like I said, since Vegeta has an understanding of what Gohan is basically capable of, he actually ends up going for Goku this time. Krillin and Gohan were about to jump in to help, but Goku basically screamed at them to let him handle this with Vegeta, that they need to go and stop Babidi from releasing that Boo creature. Shin agrees with this idea, though he is hesitant rather than not having Goku and Vegeta fight at all, but he understands that there's no option at this point, and thus Goku and Vegeta begin their battle, leaving Shin, Krillin, and Gohan to go down there and stop the release of Boo. And whereas Babidi does try to stop their advance, he's really struggling in order to be able to do that. He can't actually do much in order to hold them, that's because he's too busy trying to hold Vegeta. And Dabura is basically out of the picture, whereas he isn't dead, he's still in recovery. But luckily for him, the amount of energy that he's gathering from Goku and Vegeta is actually very immense, Boo's pretty much already 95% complete by the time that Gohan, Krillin, and Shin actually end up showing up. And this is due to the fact that Goku and Vegeta are far stronger than they were in canon, and thus are producing much larger quantities of energy. Of course, Babidi does still try to stall, given the fact that he's almost there, but Krillin and Gohan ain't having it. Both of them charging up 2 Kamehameha waves, and they fire it directly at the trio. Babidi and Dabura both scream as they are utterly obliterated. This actually causes Goku and Vegeta's fight to end up stopping, and Vegeta managed to regain control of himself almost immediately. He actually ended up apologizing to Goku for being caught lacking. Goku tells him there was no sweat, but that he was actually surprised at just how much power Vegeta had. He didn't know that he was that strong. Even if the magic was increasing him, Vegeta is still miles ahead of what he was in canon. Once again, I would actually say that in his current Super Saiyan 2 state against Goku's Super Saiyan 2 state, he was actually just slightly stronger than him. Enough to where if the battle had kept going, Goku was assured that he would have lost. The revelation that Vegeta would have been able to beat Goku actually ends up bringing a smile to his face, as this actually was enough to satisfy him. Meanwhile, back with the other 3, after the Kamehameha wave blast, it was seen that the cocoon that was housing Majin Buu was actually still intact, which made Shin suggest that Buu might actually still be a threat, as it looks like, at least from what the broken gauge was saying, that he was at full power and ready to be released. Krillin, thinking quickly, ends up going up to the cocoon, trying to hit it with a Force Spirit Fission punch in order to separate the energies, hopefully to draw him out. Unfortunately for him, it was already too late, as by the time he hit the cocoon, it had actually already bursted open, and it was found to be completely and utterly empty. This does shock the whole of the group at first, before Shin starts laughing hysterically, saying that, wow, maybe it actually was enough. They had actually managed to defeat Majin Buu, or at least stop from happening, or that Babidi's spell had ended up failing. And thus, the day was saved. However, it was Gohan who quickly pointed out for them to look up at the sky, as they see a cloud of smoke forming, and out of it comes Majin Buu. And that is where we'll be leaving off. So, I hope you guys liked it. Remember to like, favorite, and subscribe, and I will catch you all in the next one. Have a blessed day, guys. Peace.
And to all my Gummy Knights, new and old, just remember, this is a man's world, but it would be nothing without his brain and his bronze. And lying is indeed the most fun that a woman can have, without taking off her clothes. Good night.
Applause, applause, no wait, dear studio audience, I've an announcement to make. It seems the artists these days are not who you think, so we'll pick back up on that on another